Brady, how are you?
Good, Thomas. How's it going?
Good. So today you wanted to talk about something called physiological resilience. And when I first saw the word resilience, I kind of thought, cool, we're going to talk about grit and empowering through things. But no, it's got the word physiological in front of it. So what does this mean?
Yeah, I think what you just brought up is very important. There's this term physiological resilience going around, and before I think we talk about what it is, we could talk about what it's not. It doesn't refer to your ability to push hard, like you said, grit. I think, hearing resilience, that's what a lot of people are going to think, but this concept of physiological resilience, it is kind of new in the endurance sports field, and I'm kind of obsessed with it lately. And what it refers to is your ability to resist a decline in functional parameters during endurance exercise. Now, that just doesn't mean resist slowing down. It does contribute to that. But basically, it means, maybe to back up a little bit, when we think about endurance performance, we think about there are kind of these three main variables. It's your VO2 max, it is your running economy, so how efficient of a runner you are, and then your ability to sustain a high percent of your VO2 max. People can think of that sort of as your lactate threshold. All three of those variables go into determining your endurance performance.
Hmm.
And what resilience refers to is, say, throughout the duration of a marathon, your ability to resist a decline in all three of those parameters. So they're not static. When I start a race, when I say, we have Boston coming up here in a little less than 3 weeks, when I start a race, I have a certain pace that's going to be my threshold pace or what I could, maintain for the duration of a marathon. But that's when I'm fresh. When I'm an hour and a half into the Boston Marathon and I'm coming up on Heartbreak Hill and I'm fatigued and I've been running for, almost 2 hours, my VO2 max isn't the same. The pace that corresponds to my lactate threshold isn't the same because my body has been fatiguing. I have some cognitive decline going on. My glycogen stores are running low. So these numbers that I have in a fresh state aren't the same as the race goes on. And my ability to resist the decline in those numbers is what is referred to as my physiological resilience. So maybe we can go through a few more examples of that if I didn't explain it, but that's sort of the gist of resilience. It also goes by the name of durability. That might also help some people kind of understand what it means.
I think that's pretty clear. So it almost sums up the difference between who you are as a runner and your parameters at the start. You could just sum it up: start and end of a marathon, for example. The delta there could be some measure of your physiological resilience. Maybe are there any classic examples of runners who you would rate as having exceptionally good or exceptionally bad physiological resilience?
Yeah, I think a runner who would be considered to have great physiological resilience is somebody like Eliud Kipchoge. And in fact, that's actually why they chose him, along with the other two runners, to be part of that Breaking Two project. So, they did a brief screening of all these different runners, and basically they picked three guys who had outstanding metrics in VO2 max, running economy, and their sustainable VO2 max, or like their lactate threshold. They took the runners who had those three best metrics and said, these are the guys who are most likely to be able to break two in the marathon based on having a high VO2 max, having a high lactate threshold, and being very efficient runners. And so if you took all their variables and modeled, you put them into this model that spits out what's your predicted marathon time on a perfect day. Um, a lot of those, if you taking those variables, say from Kipchoge and the other two guys, it puts them right around a 2 hour marathon. But of course, that's in the perfect scenario. And when you factor in this other variable called durability, that leads to an overestimation of, the fresh state variables, and it actually provides a more accurate representation of what they could run. So if you have 100% durability, then yes, your predicted marathon time is going to be what you're able to run a marathon in. And so someone like Kipchoge, who might have a high durability, he was eventually able to break two because he is a very durable runner, whereas, say, the other guys who had the same VO2 max, same running economy, same lactate threshold, they weren't able to break two because they had worse durability.
Okay, I think that's clear. So I think it's worth setting the scene a bit in terms of the history of the sports science. So you talk about these three parameters. They've been around for quite a while in a model. And then there's there's been more awareness of durability or physiological resilience in the last few years. I think especially around Nike Breaking 2, and then there's a new paper come out. So maybe you can just give us a bit more context about the evolution of this study of this area of the science.
Yeah, totally. So the three classic kind of parameters of endurance performance, it's sort of known as the Joyner model. Physiologist Michael Joyner proposed these several decades ago, and eventually, came to the prediction of, here's when we'd break 2 hours in the marathon. And in fact, I think his prediction was probably like the sub 2 marathon happened a few decades earlier than maybe he predicted it would actually happen, based on his model. But the considering all the three parameters are important together because, Thomas, we all know like VO2 max is important, and a lot of endurance athletes have a high VO2 max. But of course, the runners with the highest VO2 max don't always win the race, and it's because you have to consider all of these other variables. If you have a VO2 max of say 65, but are able to maintain 90-95% of your VO2 max for a marathon, you're going to be a pretty decent marathoner. But if you have a VO2 max of say 80, but you can only sustain 60% of your VO2 max, you're not going to be that good of a runner. So you have to kind of consider all of these variables, not just, oh, he or she has a high VO2 max, they're going to win this race. Same thing with lactate threshold, and same thing with the running economy. I think running economy is perhaps one of the most important variables affecting endurance performance rather than, say, VO2 max. If you're able to reduce your oxygen cost of running, you're essentially operating at a lower percent of your ceiling throughout the entire race. It gives you, you're going to fatigue less during that race. So the evolution of these parameters is kind of interesting. I mean, they've stayed the same for decades, but the introduction of this durability or resilience component is sort of a new aspect, and it adds a lot really, because as I mentioned before, if you just take those three endurance parameters and you put them into a model, it's not always that accurate because it doesn't account for durability. So adding this other factor is sort of a game changer in terms of what could you actually run when this durability component is added. It will maybe not overestimate, but it'll provide a more realistic picture of what you could potentially run in a marathon. Not just for elites, but for everyone to kind of consider this variable.
And just a sort of sciencey question, but is there a standardized way they're quantifying this variable? Because I imagine you get these three metrics, the existing metrics we're talking about, they're going to degrade at different rates. And then we're bringing in this new metric, which is a measure of degradation over time, I guess. So is there a standard, maybe I'm getting a bit too much into the weeds here, but is there a standard way they're measuring it? Are there units that they're using that are standardized?
Yeah, unfortunately, right now we don't have a durability unit, but the classic or a traditional way to measure it, which many studies have done, is basically you would bring somebody into a lab and have them run for 2 hours at 70 to 75% of their VO2 max. So just a moderate intensity long run. And then after that, you would have them do a time to exhaustion or a time to exhaustion at their lactate threshold or a VO2 max test, basically. And so you would measure what's their VO2 max or what's their lactate threshold in the fresh state before doing that 2 hours, and then what's their VO2 max or their pace at their lactate threshold after that 2 hours at 70%. And then, like we mentioned earlier, you could calculate the delta between those values. So before I run for 2 hours at 70%, my pace at my lactate threshold is 5 minutes and 45 seconds per mile. Afterwards, after I run for 2 hours, we're going to go measure my lactate threshold again, and it's at 6 minutes and 10 seconds per mile. So my lactate threshold pace has considerably slowed because of that fatigue. But somebody with more durability, they do that same test, the lactate threshold afterwards, or maybe my more durable self, maybe I've trained my durability for a while. Now, after I run for 2 hours, my lactate threshold pace is 5 minutes and 55 seconds per mile. So it's only degraded by 10 seconds versus 20 seconds, meaning I'm more durable. So that would be the best way to test it. See what your metrics are in the fresh state, run for a couple of hours, measure them again, and that will kind of be a good way to assess your durability.
Okay, and you touched on this, but how do we, durability, is it something we're born with, or is it something we can train, or like most things, is it a bit of a mix?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a mix. So I think certainly we all have a inherent level maybe of durability. Some people are just going to be more durable than others just due to physiology. And this there was like this paper that came out kind of reviewing durability lately, and they talked about just how Kenyan East African athletes are born with longer and stronger Achilles tendons, and that contributes to their durability because their biomechanics just change less throughout the duration of a 2-hour run. So there are certain things about our body shape, about our cardiac structure, muscle fiber types that we really cannot change that much. And interestingly, though, durability doesn't necessarily seem to be related to how good you are in the fresh state, meaning the fastest runners aren't always the more durable. You might line up 1,000 people on a start line. You'll have people who can run 2.5 hours for a marathon, those who can run 4 hours, or those who can run maybe 5 hours for a marathon. There might be some 5-hour marathoners with better durability than the 2.5-hour marathoners. So they've actually shown in studies that durability isn't related to your baseline VO2 max or your baseline, pace at lactate threshold. So kind of reassuring for a lot of people is that you might be more durable than some of the elites out there, but you can definitely train it, and there are several proposed ways to train it. Again, not a lot of this stuff is very evidence-based yet because this concept of durability is very new in the space, but some of the ways to train it, training age and just doing training for a long time seems to be one of those, and maybe that's less modifiable than the other factors because if you're older, then you've had a longer ability to train. So they look at athletes, and those who have a longer training age, so those who have been training consistently for a long time, tend to have better durability. And that kind of makes sense. And so just doing like these, long runs, long miles for a lot of time seems to be a great way to improve your durability. So stay consistent, I guess, would be kind of the, the advice there. But there are also specific training sessions that I think are very good for developing durability. For one of those being sort of this progressive long run. So if you have, say, a 2 or a 3 hour long run planned, you're going to go out and do that run and progressively run faster and faster and faster. Maybe until the end of the run, you are running at like your lactate threshold or faster than your marathon race pace. Because that allows you to train running faster on fatigued legs. So that's going to enhance your durability. Another training session too then would be like some of your classic marathon training sessions. You're going to be running 10 to 15 times 1,000 meters or something like that. Just some of these workouts where they're kind of a long, slow grind versus like this interval workout at 100% of your VO2 max or something like that. Those appear to be pretty effective training sessions too. So the long, steady runs with progressions, the long interval workouts, and then some other things that maybe aren't related to actually running, but strength training appears to improve your durability. I know you and I think maybe touched upon this, or I wrote about it in the Run Long Run Healthy newsletter, but there's studies showing that strength training improves the durability of runners, which kind of makes sense because it's physically making you stronger, it's making your body more durable, and therefore you're going to have less of a degrade in some of your physiology throughout a long duration endurance race. So strength training appears to be a great way to train your resilience too, something that doesn't involve running.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, that definitely rings true for me in terms of I had a sort of ultra running career pre and post discovering what the inside of a gym looked like. And once I just incorporated 2 or 3 days of strength training into my week, my physiological durability just seemed to go through the roof in terms of that delta over hours and hours. I mean, this is ultra running, so the intensity was less, but I did notice that degradation was less. So yeah, I think this is an interesting concept because a lot of people listening to this are probably half marathon runners, and they think, oh, durability, it's something I would like to get better at. Maybe they've got some experience where the wheels have fallen off towards the end of a race, or they just see their splits declining. But at the same time, you ask yourself, let's say you're training for a marathon. You're already doing a bunch of, complex workouts. You've got a full training plan. Are you really going to start to incorporate these other things? And I think for a lot of people, it might be the case that this is something you would turn to if you're if you've been racing for a while and you notice that durability is an issue for you, would that be fair to would that be fair to say?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, if you are a runner and you feel like you have decent durability, then maybe this isn't something to dedicate extra time to. I mean, obviously continue to train and train hard, but maybe practicing these specific durability strategies aren't in your best interest if you have other things that you want to focus on. One of the interesting things though is that you can kind of improve your durability through some of these environmental or maybe nutrition related strategies too, which don't require dedicating extra time to training. So, for instance, doing heat acclimation stuff. So, say using the sauna or making, running in the middle of the day when it's hot outside, that can improve your durability as well. Because if you're going to race in heat and humidity, that's when durability like will probably suffer for a lot of people. So if you train in the heat and humidity, you can improve your durability somewhat in that respect as well. But nutrition strategies, so hydration and carbohydrate intake, those can improve your durability as well because we didn't really talk much about what contributes to durability, but biomechanical fatigue contributes to a decline in durability, as does glycogen depletion or dehydration. So if you're dehydrated
Yep.
or you're not fueling sufficiently, your durability is going to decline. Your resilience is going to decline throughout the duration of a race, especially something like a marathon if you're running fast. And so maintaining, 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour and maintaining adequate hydration, that's going to allow you to decline less in those parameters. I mean, a perfect example, and I just experienced this today, it's like 100% humidity and 70 degrees here where I run, where I live. And I was out on a run today and I was maintaining, hydration as much as I could. And I fueled a little bit, but by the end of that run, despite pretty much keeping the same pace the entire time. My heart rate was 20 beats per minute higher than when I started. My rating of perceived exertion was probably an 8, whereas at the start it was like a 5. So things just felt harder. So certainly my VO2 max had declined from the start to the end of that run simply due to the fact that I was incredibly dehydrated. So making sure to kind of keep watch on hydration, nutrition. If you don't want to do these specific durability training things, those can help as well.
And another topic, everybody's favorite topic, is super shoes. How can super shoes help with your physiological resilience or your durability?
They certainly do help. So I think in several ways. I mean, they improve your running economy and will contribute to less of a decline in running economy throughout the duration of a race. I really think that's just due to, one, due to the fact that they sort of propel you forward, so they do contribute to energy return. But they're also just, allowing your legs to be beat up less throughout the duration of a race. I can't remember the last time I raced without super shoes, but I certainly didn't feel as good at the end of the race. I certainly felt better at the end of the race compared to, a race that I may have done without super shoes or pre-super shoe era, less muscle soreness. So the super shoes are definitely something that's contributing to it and allowing you to train, a little bit harder as well. So, I think that we think about how the super shoes are actually helping us perform better during the race, but they allow us to run more miles faster. And so I think that contributes to durability as well because you're just getting a greater training stimulus, and then come race day, you're better prepared.
Okay, so long-term training thinking towards durability, you have the progression long runs and the sort of interval sessions we talked about. But short term on actual race day, there are quite a few actionable tips that I wasn't even thinking about that we've uncovered here that they can just increase your durability, which are just common sense tips, to be honest, aren't they? For having a good having a good run, it's super shoes, hydration, nutrition, not going out too fast, I guess. Anything you can do preserve and improve your running economy.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, doing something like cooling too, if it is hot or even if it's not hot, you're going to heat up throughout the duration of a race. So making sure to wear proper clothing and maybe trying to cool yourself maybe before the race using some of these strategies that might be available. That could help as well. But I think and the fueling and the super shoes and the hydration, those are going to be the big three because those can contribute to a lot of the decline in some of the things during a race.
Cool. Listen, I think we've covered all the talking points we had in physiological resilience. Anything I've missed?
No,
Anything
I
comes to mind?
think no, I think we've kind of covered like, how to train it, what it is, why it's important, and I guess what I just think is kind of interesting for people to think about this variable is that it's something new to think about in your training. And I mean, a lot of people, if we've been running for a long time, I've been running for, a decent amount of time in my life, but a lot of people have been running longer than me. And sometimes you hit a plateau maybe in training where you're like, oh, I'm doing all the interval workouts I can. I've sort of hit a peak on how many miles I can run during the week. And there's all this talk about VO2 max and how much you can train it. And so maybe you're somebody who's at a place where, okay, I really don't think I can improve my VO2 max anymore. I'm really training fast and maybe I can't even improve my maximal speed anymore. Running economy, I think, is always something that people can improve, but even there, everybody has their individual differences. And so a lot of these three big pillars of endurance performance, we kind of think about them as being maybe cemented or maybe being a little bit harder to change. What I think is fun about durability, I think it's probably more plastic than all of these other variables, meaning we have the ability to alter it more so with training. So if you're kind of seeking this additional, how can I become a better runner without really running faster? If you want to be a better runner, you don't have to improve your VO2 max, and you don't even have to improve your maximal speed. If you increase your durability and are able to just hang on longer throughout the duration of a race, you're going to run faster without necessarily running quote unquote faster. It's sort of like the concept, I'll draw an analogy here to 100-meter and 200-meter sprints. It's, if you look at it, it's not, Usain Bolt doesn't speed up more during the race to beat his competitors. What he does is slow down less. So if you can slow down less when you're running a marathon, even a 5K or a 10K, that's going to contribute to an improvement in your performance. So I think if people think of that in the frame of their training and their racing, it's a way that you can run faster without technically running faster.
I like this concept because it's a common sense factor at the end of the day. It's something that you can explain and everybody can understand. It's not something that's rooted in some weird science, right? It's just how can you best maintain your initial starting condition during a race?
Yeah, exactly. Just deteriorate less and you'll be
Deteriorate less.
successful.
There you go.
It is kind of funny, some of the concepts, because like you just said, Thomas, it's not, this idea like isn't necessarily new. We haven't introduced something new in physiology, but we've kind of given a name to something that we've known about for a long time. But I think that's great because it brings awareness to it and allows us to measure it and see which athletes are the best at it and look for ways to improve it.
And this isn't directly related to resilience, but what's your pacing strategy for Boston?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's something I still need to figure out. My strategy for every race is kind of the pro durability aspect where I would like to negative split. And so I think that's going to be my goal. I'm going to try to not fall prey to what everyone says happens in Boston. You go out too fast, you wreck your quads on the downhills, and then the rest of the race is kind of a bit of a slog. I think, I've not run many marathons, but the ones I have, I've negative split and run pretty decent. So I think I'm going to try to do that in Boston. Go out a little slower, or at least do an even split, and I think I'll be successful if I can do that.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, it's not something you'd measure in a lab, but talking about durability in one's own race, there's a strategic element to it on race day too. So, cool. Looking forward
Yeah,
to seeing
the idea is to be
how you get
passing
on.
people in the second half versus being passed. I think if I'm doing that, I'm successful. I consider that a successful race.
Good stuff. Cool. Thanks for your time, Brady.
No problem, Thomas. It's always fun talking about these topics with you, and I'm looking forward to whatever we come up with to talk about next.
Yeah, me too. Cheers.
Cheers.